Welcome to another Ayehu NG tutorial. In this video, we'll show how Ayehu NG can rapidly resolve alerts and their underlying incidents automatically. One of Ayehu's sales engineers will be narrating the demonstration.
With this session here today, I'm actually going to be introducing a conceptual VSA that Guy was referring to as a kind of human layer to the automation. As Guy's presented through the previous slide decks, the concept of automation takes multiple steps. It's the concept of doing something repeatable to kind of mitigate some of the steps of the analysis down to notification and communication down to remediation. So all those steps can be built in our workflow designer that we'll get to show you shortly. On top of that, what type of modalities can we really interact with? And the conceptual version of what we'll introduce Angie here today is the ability to use a VSA as that method. Our VSA Angie today is actually be used as kind of a communication vehicle for contacting an application owner during an outage. So ideally, most organizations already have modules in place for their critical applications, critical infrastructure, critical devices. But once we get those alerts, what do we do and how quickly can we manage the scenario or and get us to a stable state? In our demo that we'll be going through today, I'm going to be integrating with SolarWinds, a widely known monitoring tool, and ServiceNow for our incident tracking and service desk for auditing our processes through. With those integrations that we have out of the box, it gives us a very seamless way for us not only to identify an alert within seconds, but more importantly, also document what the automation has done externally without having to have an operator log into the automation platform to really dive through logs and go through further details that can all be posted throughout the whole process or the life cycle of the alert automatically back in your service desk tool. So as an end user or as an on-call staff member or as a help desk individual who has access to your service desk tool, I can see visibility into what's occurring during that incident. So to start, let's make sure that she's awake and just make sure to give a little hello to Angie and see. And for those who can't hear, so she's actually built as a text-to-speech agent as well. So ideally, you could interact and actually have her muted right now. Due to the fact I don't have a microphone, it's a lot easier when we did some of the presentations live. But ideally, she also adds a layer of text-to-speech, similar to like your Alexa devices that you have enabled. So up front, what I'm going to do is to first validate that there's a particular website that we're monitoring through SolarWinds is active. I'm going ahead and run a process that's going to take that website down. And then based on that, we'll run through our scenario here. So up front, let's make sure our website is up. And let's make sure I can log in just to make sure it's completely functional at this current state. All right, so it's functional. So I'm going ahead and kick off a scenario, which will cause that website to go down. So as that website goes down, the concept being here is that most organizations have a monitoring tool in place, and it can be many third-party systems ranging from SCOM to HP Operations Manager to Nagios. All those tools will be integrations that would be built directly into Ayehu NG, where the alert, as soon as it is generated, would be automatically identified and received by our platform. And in doing so, it would automatically trigger a specific workflow that will continue through the process. So while we're waiting for that alert to be generated, we're going to go ahead and switch over to our live dashboard. So our live dashboard gives you a snapshot into the current environment. So anything that's active and giving you some high level KPIs on your right hand side. One of those major metrics, as Guy was referring to, is the mean time resolution. So ideally per alert or per that's been correlated by the system, it gives me a very simple view into seeing those top level data points. Once that alert is generated and a workflow is kicked off, how can I view and how can I access, or as an operator, what can I see real time? Real time, what you'll be able to see is the running workflows, the secondary tab here. So I can actually see which workflows are running. So as that alert was just received a couple seconds ago, it's gone ahead and triggered a workflow, which will now trigger our VSA to start interacting. So one of the first steps, as you can see here, she's identified that that particular alert was generated. It's then gone ahead and integrated with the ServiceNow CMDB to really identify who was the application owner that we can contact immediately. So within seconds here, I can go ahead and contact, and she's actually a lot faster than me talking actually. So this is a workflow that we'll get through shortly, but ideally it's going through a lot of different steps here. So ideally we want to go ahead and validate the site is back up. So we go ahead to the website and we'll see that it is back up, and I can actually log in. Oops, if I can put the right password in. And I can see it's back up. And throughout that whole process, which was in seconds of receiving the alert, it's gone through an automated workflow that went through and remediated the task. And during that process, it's gone ahead and the application owner. And really, if you think about what the VSA is giving me, it's giving me another modality in which I can communicate bidirectionally with an end user. The end user in our scenario today was the application owner. But more importantly, from an IT perspective, it can be an on-call staff member. It could be a help desk. It could be a level 2 member that they can go ahead and not only interact with the workflow as a conditional, but really give more input into what it should happen next. In our simple scenario here, it really went through some initial forensics, went through and diagnosed it and did the remediation. But if there's custom processes that are necessary, or custom scripts, or custom actions that you would like to have as a human layer, that can all be built to workflow very seamlessly, which we'll get to shortly once I show the workflow designer. But prior to that, let's go ahead and kind of go through the steps here of what she did before I even was able to really respond to it. So up front, she's first identified that there's the website that was down, and like I said, it went ahead and queried a CMDB to really identify who the application owner is, so we can really give them a heads up of what's kind of happening before even customers or their organization starts contacting them directly. So up front, she's gone ahead and notified me, then went through an initial analysis of identifying what could be the potential issue for this website. Through that analysis, she went ahead and found that the specific service tied to the website, which, for those who aren't technical, she's went through those steps, found the root cause potentially, and went ahead and tried to resolve it. So she went through an automated workflow that went ahead and resolved that particular issue, with the second step of also validating that the site was back up as a check. Throughout that whole process, what she's also done is create a ticket. So let's go ahead and jump over to ServiceNow real quick and take a look at what happened in that ticket. All right, so here's our ticket, and you can see the current state is resolved. So she auto-created the ticket and closed it for us as she was able to bring the site back up. As an end user, you can see here are some of the details that the automated workflow was able to do. It created a ticket, it associated to the correct CI, and it also did some initial forensics throughout that workflow that posted it here. What's important to understand is all these data points that were collected in the process of the workflow, it was documented here, but more importantly, if it requires a human interaction, those data points can be given to the on-call staff member up front. So there is no delay. And what we find a lot of times with IT alerting is there's no delay for getting the initial steps. I don't have to go to my laptop, log into the server, RDP, do some commands and get some data. All that data, as we saw, was done in seconds because the workflow went ahead and ran, got me all the data sets that I've pre-allocated to define, determined the root cause, and went ahead and resolved it. All those data points are all what you'll see shortly, variables that are dynamic that can now be passed over to the end user or to the service desk ticket, as you can see here. Okay, let's go ahead and switch over to what actually occurred here. So let's go over to the workflow. All right, so here's our workflow designer. This is our kind of bread and butter to what the application provides. This is the interface in which a designer is able to build those automated workflows using a very simple designer. On our left-hand side, you'll see all of our out-of-box building blocks. We have over about 500 different actions that I can use, that I can either drag and drop into our workflow. I can also go to a point in which I can add it. But here is really where you can get you can really minimize the impact of an alert. So as a workflow is triggered, it's gone through some initial steps. One of the first steps that you typically want to do is make sure it's a valid alert. So as you can see here, we can do a simple URL check up front. After we've gone through that, here's our steps for determining who the owner of application was. And then we've gone through and contacted the end user. And in each one of these building blocks, each one of these sub processes or activities, it's all driven through the UI. So as a designer, I can simply make changes, modify to my own internal processes simply by going through a wizard here. So in this particular instance here, you can see where I'm able to query any specific type of record in ServiceNow. In this particular instance, I was querying for the CI of a Windows server that I've pre-alerted on. So based on that, I passed what we see here as a % caption. What a % references is a dynamic value, and this is really an important key. This single workflow is able to handle a web-related or website-related alert for any type of node, any type of website. Because what the workflow is done, it's essentially a wrapper which has the data passed to it based on the alert. That data from the alert is easily accessible to you as a designer, depending on the value, simply by going through our variable picker here. So in the variable picker here, I can see all the data points in the integration that I'm receiving the message from as simple selections that I can now pass to my workflow as designer. So as you build these workflows up, the time to build these are drastically reduced due to the fact that it's all UI based. So I can pick and choose which attributes I need to access. After it's gone through some of the initial steps, it's then gone through some of the analysis. So what are a couple of things that we want to do? We want to ping, check the memory, validate that specific ports are available. So here you can see multiple steps that were taken by the workflow, which essentially was the VSA as the front end, to do some initial steps. Let's see what the root cause potentially was. After we've gone data that the service was down, and we went ahead and restarted it. Those are kind of preliminary steps that the workflow can give us. Now, as a automated process, how do we go back kind of future state and look at auditing? Or what do we see in the data that's being collected by the orchestration tool? We also give you a view into that, what we call the audit trail. So switching over to the audit trail, what I'm able to see is a history of all of the events that were received and really the actions that were taken. So in that particular alert that we received, and this is the one here at 422 East at Pacific, you'll see that this is the particular alert. This was the device, and here are all of the actual steps that were taken. So in that design that we showed, you saw the individual kind of building blocks. Each one was generating output, and that output is what you see here and completely accessible to you from a design perspective, but also all downstream. So up front, you can see I was unable to do the URL check, so confirming that alert. And it went through the whole process. You can see all the steps, the ticket number, all of that is completely logged and audited. So as a executive and a manager, I can always go back and see really where the steps were completely done, what data sets were received, and push those data sets out to any third-party sources as needed.
This concludes our tutorial on how to rapidly resolve alerts using Ayehu NG. For more information, please visit our support portal at support.ayehu.com.